Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. For those of you who are new here, this is a place where I share real stories about relationship betrayals and the journeys toward justice and healing. Today's story is my own, a personal account that changed the entire trajectory of my life. It's a story about betrayal, calculated planning, and ultimately, justice. My name is Michael Anderson, and until 3 years ago, I lived what I thought was a perfect life in suburban Connecticut with my wife of 12 years, Stephanie. That I'll never forget the tree-lined street we lived on, Maple Grove Avenue, in Westport. Our colonial home was the one with the dark blue shutters and white picket fence, the kind of place you'd see in a magazine spread about achieving the American dream. We bought it 8 years into our marriage, after scrimping and saving and working countless overtime hours to afford the down payment. The day we got those keys, Stephanie jumped into my arms on the front porch, both of us laughing and crying at the same time. That memory still feels like it belongs to someone else's life now that I worked as a senior software engineer for Bluestream Financial Technologies, making a comfortable six-figure salary developing trading algorithms. I had started as a junior developer right out of college and worked my way up through dedication and countless late nights. My team respected me, my bosses valued me, and I took pride in being the steady, reliable rock that both my company and my marriage could count on. Stephanie, with her infectious laugh and natural charisma, had found her calling in real estate. She worked for Lux Home Properties, one of the most prestigious agencies in Fairfield County. She had a gift for connecting with people, remembering every client's children's names, their hobbies, their preferences. She could walk into a house and immediately envision how to stage it to appeal to the perfect buyer. I used to love watching her work at open houses. She lit up the room, making everyone feel like they were part of an exclusive opportunity rather than just shopping for property. "You know why I'm so good at this job?" she once told me over celebratory champagne after closing a particularly difficult sale. "Because I truly believe that finding the right home changes people's lives. I'm not selling houses. I'm selling possibilities." That was Stephanie, always seeing the bigger picture, always thinking about potential and transformation. It was one of the countless things I loved about her that we met during sophomore year at Boston University. I was the awkward computer science major who spent more time with code than people. She was the vivacious communications student who seemed to know everyone on campus. We were paired for a project in an economics elective we both took to fulfill a requirement. I was terrified of her at first. She seemed to exist in a different world than mine, a world of easy social connections and confident opinions. "You're the first person I've met who's quieter when they're thinking harder," she observed during our third study session. "Most people get louder when they're trying to sound smart. You get quieter when you actually are being smart." I like that. It was the first time someone had seen my introversion as a strength rather than something to fix. I fell hard and fast. To my ongoing amazement, she fell too. We married a year after graduation in a modest ceremony with family and close friends. Neither of us came from money, so we started from scratch, a tiny apartment, IKEA furniture, meal planning on a tight budget. We were happy though, genuinely happy. We supported each other's career ambitions, celebrated small victories, and planned meticulously for our future. By our 10-year anniversary, we had achieved what many would consider success. The beautiful home, the thriving careers, financial stability, regular vacations to places we dreamed of visiting. We chose not to have children, a mutual decision we revisited periodically but always landed in the same place. We valued our freedom, our ability to work long hours when needed, to take spontaneous weekend trips, to focus on building our careers and financial security. Our friends envied what we had. "You guys never seem to fight," my college roommate Mark commented at our anniversary party. "What's the secret?" "Communication and compromise," Stephanie answered smoothly, her arm linked through mine. "And marrying your best friend." I nodded in agreement, pulling her closer. "We just get each other. Always have." That night, after everyone had gone home and we were cleaning up together, Stephanie wrapped her arms around me from behind as I loaded the dishwasher. "12 years," she murmured against my shoulder. "And I'd choose you all over again." Looking back now, I wonder if she meant it at that moment, or if the lies had already begun. That's the insidious thing about betrayal. It retroactively questions every memory, casting shadows on moments that once seemed bathed in light. Our social circle was tight-knit but diverse. Other couples from our respective industries, neighbors, who had become friends, college connections who had settled in the Northeast like us. We hosted dinner parties every few months, attended charity events together, maintained traditions like our annual Super Bowl gathering and summer barbecue. Stephanie was always the social coordinator, the one who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who suggested thoughtful gifts for friends going through hard times. You navigate code, I navigate people. She used to joke that we had date nights every Friday, a tradition we'd maintained since our cash-strapped early days. Sometimes upscale restaurants, sometimes takeout and a movie at home, but always intentional time for just us. I thought those nights kept us connected, kept our relationship strong and vibrant despite the pressures and distractions of busy professional lives that I couldn't have imagined that beneath this perfect surface, something toxic was growing. That the woman who held my hand across candlelit tables on Friday nights was crafting an elaborate exit from our life together. That the foundation I thought we'd built on solid ground was actually shifting sand. The first cracks appeared about 4 years ago, in the spring. Looking back, I can pinpoint the shift to around April, when Connecticut was finally thawing out from a particularly brutal winter. Small things at first, subtle changes that are easy to rationalize away when you trust someone completely. Stephanie started working later hours more frequently. Not every night, but enough that our previously sacred dinner time became more sporadic. The market is absolutely insane right now, she'd explain, sounding both exhausted and exhilarated when she'd finally come home. Everyone's looking to buy before summer hits and inventory is so low. I had 3 bidding wars just today. Given what I knew about the real estate cycles, this made perfect sense. I supported her completely, often keeping dinner warm or ordering her favorite takeout for when she'd finally make it home. I was proud of her success and understood that sometimes careers demand temporary sacrifices. Then came the phone behaviors, small changes that registered somewhere in my subconscious before my conscious mind acknowledged them. Her phone was always face down on tables. Always. Whether at breakfast, on the coffee table, or on her nightstand. She'd never been particularly secretive with her phone before. Not that we snooped through each other's devices, but there had been a casual openness previously that was now replaced with subtle guardedness. She began taking calls in other rooms. Sorry, it's a client with a complicated situation, she'd murmur before stepping onto the back deck or into her home office, closing the door behind her. Again, nothing overtly suspicious. Client confidentiality is important in her line of work, but it was a change from her previous habit of comfortably taking most calls in shared spaces. Her texting increased significantly as well. She was always a social person with many connections, but now her phone seemed to constantly buzz with notifications, especially in the evenings and on weekends. When I'd glance over, she'd often quickly switch screens or put the phone down altogether. Everything. Okay, I'd ask casually. Just work stuff, was the consistent reply. This market never sleeps. What really caught my attention was when she began mentioning a new colleague named James Harrington who had joined her firm in July of that year. James had transferred from their Manhattan office, apparently some kind of rising star in luxury real estate who wanted to relocate to Connecticut for quality of life reasons. James this, James that. James had amazing strategies for closing deals. James knew all the right people in the most exclusive neighborhoods. James had connections with international investors. James was quickly becoming one of their top performers, giving even the veterans a run for their money. He's just got this magnetic energy about him, Stephanie explained over one of our increasingly rare shared dinners. Clients instantly trust him, and he's so generous with his knowledge. He's been giving me tips on approaching the ultra-luxury market that I never would have figured out on my own. Sounds like quite the mentor, I observed, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the unease starting to build in my stomach. More of a collaborator, really, she corrected quickly. We're at similar levels, just with different strengths. We're actually thinking about partnering on some properties, combining my local knowledge with his luxury expertise. That makes sense. I nodded, pushing my discomfort aside. Collaboration was smart business, after all, and Stephanie had always been ambitious. Then came the unexplained weekend seminars and client meetings. A Saturday morning house staging workshop in New Haven. A Sunday afternoon meeting with international clients who could only see properties on weekends. A real estate investment conference in Boston that required an overnight stay. A luxury property tour in the Hamptons that ran late, requiring another unexpected overnight. None of these events were implausible in isolation. Real estate, especially at the high end, often demands irregular hours and exceptional service. But the frequency was increasing, and the pattern was undeniable. Our weekends, once fiercely protected as our time together, were now regularly interrupted by professional obligations that couldn't be rescheduled. Our Friday date nights became less frequent too. Rain check for tomorrow became a common text around 4 p.m. on Fridays. Showing ran late. Clients want to see two more properties while they're in town. Or unexpected offer came in, need to work with the clients on counter strategy. Always reasonable, always work-related, always apologetic, but with that undercurrent of excitement about her career momentum. When I'd suggest spontaneous dinner plans midweek to compensate for the missed Fridays, she'd already have commitments. Networking events, client appreciation dinners, broker open houses. Again, all normal activities in her industry, but the cumulative effect was a noticeable reduction in our time together. Her social media became more active during this period, but I was featured in fewer and fewer posts. Where once her Instagram had been filled with photos of us together at home or on our adventures, it began to shift toward professional content, beautifully staged houses, successful closing celebrations, industry networking events. When I did appear, it was often in group shots rather than the couple photos that had previously dominated her feed that I told myself I was being paranoid. Stephanie was ambitious. She was probably just focused on her career advancement, especially now that she had a chance to break into the ultra-luxury market. The timing made sense with the hot real estate cycle. The behavioral changes were all explainable through the lens of career dedication, but something felt off. An intuition I couldn't articulate, but couldn't ignore either. The woman I'd shared my life with for over a decade felt increasingly like a roommate who came and went on her own schedule, sharing less and less of her inner world with me. That I tried addressing it directly one night in August, after she canceled our weekend plans for a last-minute showing for VIP clients. "I feel like we've been drifting apart lately," I said carefully, as she prepared to leave. "Your schedule has been so packed that we barely see each other anymore." Her expression softened immediately, and she set down her purse to come sit beside me on the couch. "Oh, Mike, I'm so sorry it feels that way. This is just such a critical time in my career path. The connections I'm making now, especially with James mentoring me on the luxury market approach, this could completely change our financial future." She took my hands in hers, her eyes meeting mine with what looked like genuine regret. "It's not forever, I promise. Once I establish myself in this segment of the market, things will stabilize. And think about what this means for us, maybe. An earlier retirement, maybe that vacation home in Vermont we've talked about." "I understand the opportunity," I assured her. "I just miss you. Miss us." "I miss you too," she said, leaning in to kiss me. "How about I make it up to you next Friday? No matter what comes up, I'll block the entire evening. Dinner at Antonio's, your favorite wine, the works." "That sounds perfect," I said, feeling the knot in my stomach loosen slightly. She did keep that particular promise. The following Friday, we had a lovely dinner at Antonio's, our favorite Italian restaurant. She was present, engaged, affectionate, like the Stephanie I'd fallen in love with. We talked about everything except work, reminisced about our early days together, made love when we got home. For that one evening, my concerns seemed unfounded, products of an insecure imagination. The relief was short-lived. By Sunday afternoon, she was off to another broker event, and the pattern resumed. The real red flag came in September when I noticed changes to our finances. We maintained separate accounts for personal spending, but shared accounts for household expenses and savings goals. Reviewing the joint account statements, something I did monthly as part of managing our overall budget, I noticed a pattern of small withdrawals that didn't align with our usual expenses. $300 here, $500 there. Not enormous sums that would immediately trigger concern, but significant enough when added together over several months. When I casually asked about them, Stephanie's explanations were vague and inconsistent. "Oh, that was for the office gift pool. You know, birthdays, baby showers, that kind of thing." Or, that was for client appreciation gifts. The company reimburses me, but it takes a while to process. Or the most concerning, did I withdraw that? Let me check my receipts. Oh, it must have been for those home decor items I picked up for staging the Riverside property. You know how presentation is everything in this market. The explanations weren't completely implausible, but they felt rehearsed, and Stephanie seemed unusually flustered when discussing these financial questions. She who had always been meticulous. About our shared budgeting system, other small financial discrepancies appeared. Shopping bags with no purchases to show for them. A charge from Nordstrom when she claimed to have been at a showing. A new gym membership at a facility near her office, though she never seemed to go to the gym when she said she would. Her workout. Clothes remained untouched in her drawer for weeks at a time. Still, I had no concrete evidence of anything beyond unusual behavior and financial sloppiness, neither of which necessarily indicated infidelity. Just a growing knot in my stomach and a sense that the person I trusted most in the world was becoming a stranger. I considered following her one day or checking her location on our shared phone plan, but both options felt like crossing a line. I wasn't ready to cross. We had built our relationship on trust. If that foundation was truly crumbling, I wanted to be certain before taking actions I couldn't take back. So I watched, and I waited, hoping I was wrong, hoping there was a reasonable explanation for all of it, hoping the woman who had been my partner for 12 years wasn't living a double life right under my nose. Then came Sunday, October 15th, the day that changed everything. A date permanently etched in my memory, the dividing line between my old life and whatever would come after. The morning had started normally enough. I woke early, as usual, and went for my weekend run, 5 miles along the community trail near our home. Stephanie was still asleep when I left, having come home late from what she described as dinner with the office team the night before. When I returned around 8:30, she was in the kitchen in her robe, making coffee. "Morning," I said, leaning in for a quick kiss. She turned her cheeks slightly, which I attributed to my post-run state. "Any plans for today?" "Actually," she said, checking her phone, "Marcia just texted. They have out-of-town buyers who flew in unexpectedly and want to see the Westridge property. Since I have the relationship with the sellers, I should handle it." Marcia was her broker. This request seemed legitimate enough. "On a Sunday morning?" I asked, trying not to sound accusatory. "These are serious buyers, apparently, coming in from Chicago with cash in hand. You know how it is with these luxury properties. We jump when they say jump." She smiled apologetically. "I should be back by early afternoon, though. Maybe we can do a late lunch." "Sure," I said, masking my disappointment. Another weekend plan. Disrupted. "I'll catch up on some work projects in the meantime." She rushed to shower and dress, emerging 40 minutes later looking stunning in a tailored blue dress I hadn't seen before, subtle makeup enhancing her features, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves around her shoulders. It seemed like a lot of effort for showing a house to already interested buyers, but Stephanie had always believed in presenting herself immaculately to clients. "Don't wait for me if you get hungry," she called as she headed out the door. Not sure exactly how long this will take. The house fell silent after she left. I made myself breakfast, then settled at the dining table with my laptop to work on a side project I'd been developing, a trading algorithm simulation that I hoped might eventually become my own business venture. That's when I noticed Stephanie had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. She'd clearly been checking emails before Marcia's urgent text, and in her rush, had forgotten to close it or take it with her. I wouldn't normally think anything of this. We respected each other's privacy and had never been the type to snoop through each other's devices. But as I passed by to refill my coffee, something caught my eye on the screen. A name in the email subject line, James. The preview text visible without clicking anything read. "Last night was incredible. Can't wait until we can." My hand froze midair, coffee cup suspended. Everything inside me screamed to keep walking, to respect the boundaries we'd established. But another voice, the voice of self-preservation, the voice that had been whispering warnings for months, urged me to look. That I set my coffee down and looked at the screen more carefully. The email was part of a long chain between Stephanie and james.harrington@luxhome.com. My heart was pounding as I scrolled up to see the full exchange. What I found wasn't just evidence of an affair. It was evidence of a long-term, deeply established relationship operating parallel to our marriage, complete with inside jokes, future plans, and a level of intimacy that could only come from months of involvement. Last night was incredible. Can't wait until we can finally stop sneaking around. 6 more months, baby. 6 more months, and we start our real life together. Mike doesn't suspect a thing. He's too absorbed in his coding projects to notice what's right in front of him. James had responded, "You're incredible. Worth every risk. But remember our agreement. Careful with the paper trail. Use the secure folder for anything sensitive. Love you madly." My hands were shaking as I navigated to her browser history, finding a bookmarked link to a cloud storage service I didn't recognize. The username was already saved, a variation of her name I'd never seen her use before. The password field was blank, but given the pattern I knew she typically used, I tried a few variations and gained access on the third attempt. Inside was a folder titled simply J plus S, James and Stephanie. It contained hundreds of files, meticulously organized into subfolders: photos, plans, property research, and most damning of all, exit strategy. The photos folder contained images of them together dating back nearly a year, far longer than I had suspected anything was amiss. Dinner dates at restaurants hours from our home, where they'd be unlikely to run into anyone we knew. Weekend trips to Vermont, Maine, even the Bahamas, all during times when Stephanie had told me she was at real estate conferences or on women's trips with colleagues. The intimacy in these photos was undeniable. The way they looked at each other, the casual physical comfort that comes only with established relationships. In one particularly painful image, they were on a beach at sunset, champagne glasses raised in a toast, with Stephanie wearing a necklace I had given her for our anniversary. But what really made my blood run cold was the exit strategy folder. Inside was a document titled Timeline and Approach, last modified just 3 days earlier. It was a detailed, methodical plan for how Stephanie would leave our marriage while maximizing her financial gain and minimizing any consequence to her reputation. The document was chilling in its calculated approach. Notes on how to make me look unstable, suggestions that she should start documenting instances where I lost my temper, events that had never occurred, or became controlling, another fabrication. Plans to gradually document emotional neglect by sending herself emails after manufactured arguments that, again, had never happened. Financial strategies were outlined in detail, how to gradually move assets without triggering my awareness, which accounts to target first, consulting recommendations for hidden money transfers that wouldn't appear in our regular statements. She had even researched judges in our county, noting which ones statistically favored wives in divorce proceedings. The timeline was equally precise. They were planning to wait until James received his upcoming partnership at the firm before filing, which would happen in about 6 months. The partnership would significantly increase his income and stability, making their transition smoother. The plan was for her to get the house, a significant portion of my retirement savings, which far exceeded hers due to my company's excellent matching program, and monthly support payments, all while moving in with James once enough time had passed for it to seem like they met after our separation. The level of detail was staggering. She had already consulted with a divorce attorney, listing initial recommendations and strategies. She had researched the value of all our assets, including things I'd brought into the marriage that should have been protected as separate property. She had even drafted language for how she would announce our separation to friends and family, painting herself as the long-suffering wife who had tried everything to save a marriage to an emotionally distant workaholic that I felt physically ill. Reading through it all, 12 years of my life with someone who could coldly plan my financial and social destruction while sleeping beside me each night. The betrayal wasn't just the affair. Affairs happen. People make mistakes. Hearts stray. The betrayal was the calculated, methodical plan to ruin me while presenting herself as the victim that I copied everything to a secure cloud drive of my own. Every email, every photo, every planning document. I created backups on a USB drive as well. Then I closed the laptop exactly as I'd found it, positioned on the kitchen counter, screen at the same angle that I needed to get out of the house. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grab my car keys. I left a brief note. Gone for a drive to clear my head. Don't wait for lunch. and escaped to my car that I drove aimlessly for hours, eventually finding myself at Campo Beach, a place where Stephanie and I had spent countless summer evenings watching the sunset. The irony wasn't lost on me. I sat on the cold sand, watching. Families stroll by, couples holding hands, ordinary people living ordinary Sunday lives, while mine had just imploded. The initial shock gave way to a profound sense of grief. I mourned not just for the marriage I thought I had, but for the person I thought I'd married. Had any of it been real? Had she ever loved me? Or had I been a convenient stepping stone all along? The questions were corrosive, eating away at every happy memory, making me doubt my own judgment about everything. By the time the sun began to set, something had shifted within me. The grief was still there, a hollow ache in my chest, but alongside it grew something else, a cold, clear resolve. I had been played for a fool, but I would not be destroyed by this. Stephanie and James had spent months planning my demise. They had no idea I was now going to be planning theirs. I started the car and headed home, my mind beginning to formulate what would become my counter-strategy. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I had stopped feeling like a victim. I had become a strategist with one clear objective: to ensure that their carefully orchestrated plan would become the blueprint for their own downfall. When I walked in, Stephanie was in the kitchen preparing dinner, her laptop now closed and put away. She looked up with a smile that I now recognized as performance. "Hey, there you are." I was starting to worry. "Everything okay? Just needed some fresh air," I replied, matching her casual tone. "How did the showing go?" "Really well," she said, stirring something on the stove. "They loved the property. I think we'll get an offer this week." Another lie to add to the collection. I wondered if there had even been a showing, or if she'd spent the day with James, planning their future on the ruins of mine. "That's great," I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. "You always close the deal." She laughed, and I joined her, both of us acting in a macabre play where only I knew the real script. As I helped her finish preparing dinner, making small talk about mundane things, a new thought crystallized. This wouldn't be a messy, emotional confrontation. This would be chess, not checkers. And I was prepared to sacrifice a few pieces to win the game. The next morning, I woke up next to the stranger who was still legally my wife and put my game face on. I kissed her goodbye as she left for work, told her I loved her, and played my role perfectly. As soon as her car pulled away, I began executing the first phase of what I had mentally labeled Operation Checkmate. I needed to be smart. Showing my hand immediately would only alert them to cover their tracks and potentially accelerate their timeline. I needed evidence, leverage, and a bulletproof plan that would not only protect me from their scheme, but ensure they faced the full consequences of their actions. First priority was securing my finances. I didn't clean out our accounts. That would be illegal and immediately tip her off. Instead, I opened my own accounts at a different bank and started directing my new income there. I changed the direct deposit information with my HR department, citing account restructuring as the reason. I created a new email address that Stephanie didn't know about for all financial communications moving forward, but I carefully reviewed all of our joint assets and accounts, documenting every detail. I pulled our full credit reports to ensure there weren't any accounts or loans I was unaware of. I checked the deed to our house, confirming how it was titled and what equity we each technically owned based on our contributions. I researched the laws in our state regarding division of assets and divorce, particularly focusing on retirement accounts and how infidelity might impact proceedings. The second priority was gathering irrefutable evidence of their affair and their plotting. I hired Martin Reeves, a private investigator who specialized in infidelity cases and had excellent reviews for his discretion and thoroughness. At our initial meeting in a coffee shop 2 towns over, I laid out what I already knew and what I needed. I don't need evidence that they're having an affair. I already have that, I explained quietly. What I need is documentation that would hold up in court. Time-stamped photos, location data, witness statements if possible. Martin nodded, his weathered face serious. I understand. And I should be clear, I won't do anything illegal. No hacking. Emails, no breaking and entering. Nothing that would compromise the integrity of the evidence. That's exactly what I want, I assured him. Everything by the book. This needs to be bulletproof when the time comes. For the next 2 months, Martin tracked their movements meticulously. He photographed them entering and leaving hotels together during times when Stephanie told me she was showing properties or at industry events. He documented their dinner dates, weekend excursions, even midweek rendezvous at James's apartment. In Stanford, he collected receipts from restaurants and hotels, matched against times when Stephanie had given me different accounts of her whereabouts. Most valuably, he established a pattern that aligned perfectly with the withdrawal dates from our joint account, proving that the money Stephanie had been siphoning was directly funding their affair. Third, I consulted with the best divorce attorney in the state, Eleanor Walsh, a formidable litigator with a reputation for handling high-conflict divorces with strategic precision. I wasn't ready to file immediately, but I needed to understand exactly what I should be doing to protect myself legally. Our first meeting lasted 3 hours. I brought copies of all the evidence I had gathered, including Stephanie's exit strategy document and the financial records showing her undisclosed withdrawals. Eleanor was initially concerned about my calculated approach. Most clients come in here emotional, angry, wanting immediate action, she observed. Your level of control is unusual. Trust me, I've been through all those emotions privately, I told her. But I can't afford to let emotion drive my decisions right now. They've been planning this for months. I need to be equally strategic. When I showed her Stephanie's exit strategy document, her expression darkened. This is extraordinarily calculated. She's essentially planning to commit fraud against you in the court. Exactly, I said. So I need to know, what do I do now? How do I protect myself without showing my hand too early? Eleanor laid out a comprehensive strategy. First, secure copies of all financial records going back at least 3 years, bank statements, investment accounts, retirement accounts, property documents, tax returns, everything. Second, document all unusual behavior or unexplained absences with dates and times. Third, keep a log of any unusual expenses or withdrawals. Fourth, consult with a forensic accountant to trace any potentially hidden assets. Most importantly, she stressed, maintain the status quo at home. Don't confront her yet. Don't change your behavior noticeably. Don't give any indication that you're preparing for divorce. The element of surprise will be crucial given what she's planning. I followed her advice to the letter. I gathered every financial document, created secure digital backups, and established a comprehensive record of our assets. I hired a forensic accountant who confirmed my suspicions. Stephanie had indeed been diverting more funds than I initially realized, using a separate account I hadn't known about. Fourth, I started keeping meticulous records of everything. I installed home security cameras under the guise of a series of break-ins in nearby neighborhoods. Better safe than sorry, I told Stephanie, who agreed without suspicion. The cameras, strategically placed to cover entrances and key areas of the house, documented her comings and goings, often at odds with where she claimed to be. I saved every text and email between us. I documented when Stephanie was supposed to be at work but wasn't, confirmed by cross-referencing the private investigator's reports with her stated schedule. I tracked the money that was disappearing from our accounts, creating a detailed spreadsheet that matched withdrawal dates with her documented meetings with James. Fifth, and perhaps most importantly, I worked on myself. The betrayal had taken a physical toll. I wasn't sleeping well, wasn't eating properly, was functioning on autopilot through a fog of shock and anger. I recognized that I needed to be at my best for what was coming. I started hitting the gym hard, channeling my rage into physical transformation. I reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with during the marriage, careful not to reveal what was happening, but rebuilding a support network I would surely need. I began seeing Dr. Levine, a therapist specializing in betrayal trauma, who helped me process the emotional devastation without letting it cloud my judgment or strategic planning. What you're experiencing is similar to PTSD, Dr. Levine explained during one session. The person you trusted most has violated that trust in the most fundamental way. Your brain is trying to reconcile the person you thought you knew with this new reality. How do I function knowing what I know, seeing her every day, pretending everything is normal? I asked. You compartmentalize, she advised. Think of it as an undercover operation. You have a role to play for a specific purpose and time frame. It's not your whole identity. It's a temporary mission with an end date. That framing helped enormously. Each day became part of a larger strategy rather than an isolated exercise. In deception, most challenging of all, I maintained absolute normalcy around Stephanie. I kept our typical routines. I remained attentive and supportive of her career successes. I didn't confront her about inconsistencies in her stories. I didn't display the jealousy or suspicion she might be watching for. I even suggested we take a weekend trip to Cape Cod when her work schedule calmed down, which she predictably found excuses to postpone. I'm swamped through the holidays, she explained apologetically. Maybe in the new year? I promise we'll make time then. Of course, I agreed easily. No rush. I know how important this phase of your career is. The performance was exhausting. Every smile felt like a betrayal of myself. Every "I love you" stuck in my throat. Every night sleeping beside her required a compartmentalization so complete it sometimes felt like I was splitting in two. There were moments of weakness. One night in December, after Stephanie canceled yet another dinner plan claiming client demands, the private investigator sent me photos of her and James at an intimate restaurant in New York City, laughing over wine, his hand caressing hers. Across the table, the rage that surged through me was so intense that I nearly called her right then to explode the charade. Instead, I went for a punishing run in freezing temperatures, pushing myself until my lungs burned and my legs trembled, until the physical pain temporarily eclipsed the emotional one. When I returned home, I was calm enough to send her a simple text. Hope your client meeting goes well. Don't worry about dinner. I grabbed something. The holidays were particularly difficult. We spent Christmas with her parents, who had always treated me like a son. Watching her accept their loving gifts, seeing her play the role of devoted daughter and wife while I knew the truth, tested the limits of my self-control. When her father pulled me aside to tell me how lucky Stephanie was to have such a solid, dependable partner, I nearly broke down. You two have what so many couples lack, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. Real commitment. A foundation that can't be shaken. If only he knew how thoroughly that foundation had already crumbled, but I maintained the facade. For 6 long, agonizing months, I lived with my betrayer, smiled at her lies, and built my case piece by meticulous piece. I became a method actor in my own life, playing the role of unsuspecting husband while systematically preparing for the moment when the curtain would finally fall. It was the hardest performance of my life. But as Eleanor reminded me during our periodic check-ins, you're not just protecting your financial future. You're protecting your dignity and your truth. Sometimes justice requires patience. By early spring, my preparations were complete. The private investigator had compiled a comprehensive dossier documenting months of their affair, hundreds of photos, location data, witness statements from hotel staff and restaurant servers who recognized them as regulars. The forensic accountant had traced over $42,000 that Stephanie had diverted from our joint accounts to fund their lifestyle and begin building her separate financial foundation. My attorney had all necessary paperwork prepared, ready to file at a moment's notice. Most importantly, I had rediscovered my own strength. The initial devastation had given way to clarity and purpose. The gym sessions had transformed my physique, shedding the comfortable softness of married life for lean muscle. The therapy had helped me process the trauma without being consumed by it. The renewed friendships had reminded me that I was more than just half of a failed marriage. You're not the same man who walked into my office 6 months ago, Eleanor observed during what would be our final planning meeting. You were shell-shocked then. Now you look ready. I finished for her. I'm ready to reclaim my life. The timing would be critical. Eleanor and I had discussed various moments to make my move, weighing the pros and cons of each scenario. Spring was coming, and with it, the most important social event in Stephanie's professional calendar, the annual charity gala for the local real estate association. Everyone who mattered in their industry would be there. Colleagues, clients, community leaders. Stephanie was on the planning committee, responsible for securing major donors. James would be attending as her colleague. It was the perfect stage for the first act of my counter-strategy. Remember, Eleanor cautioned as we finalized the details, the goal isn't just emotional satisfaction. The goal is to protect yourself legally and financially while ensuring they can't control the narrative. If this goes exactly according to plan, they'll realize you know everything before you ever have to say it out loud. I nodded, understanding completely. Social consequences first. Legal consequences second. Maximum protection, minimum drama. The night before the gala, I barely slept. Stephanie noticed my restlessness, attributing it to work stress when she asked in the morning. Big project deadline coming up? I lied easily, having become fluent in deception, a skill I'd learned from the best. Nothing to worry about. Poor baby, she said, kissing my cheek. Try to get some rest this weekend. I'll be busy with the gala tonight and property showings tomorrow, but maybe Sunday we can just relax at home. That sounds perfect. I agreed, knowing that by Sunday, relaxation would be the last thing on her mind. As she left for final gala preparations, dressed impeccably in a designer suit I'd never seen before, purchased, no doubt, with our joint funds. I felt an odd sense of peace. The charade was almost over. After tonight, I would never have to pretend again. The social dismantling had to come first. If I filed for divorce immediately, they would close ranks and spin the narrative according to Stephanie's meticulously crafted exit strategy. She'd already laid the groundwork, making occasional comments to mutual friends about my increased irritability or how I was becoming more and more absorbed in work. Small seeds planted carefully, ready to bloom into the story of a neglectful husband when needed. I needed to expose the truth in a way that would make their planned narrative impossible to believe, and I needed to do it in a setting where they couldn't immediately control the damage. The annual charity gala was being held at the Westport Yacht Club, a sprawling facility overlooking Long Island Sound. The event raised funds for housing initiatives for low-income families, ironically championing home stability, while many of its committee members were engaged in extramarital affairs that would ultimately destroy homes. 2 days before the gala, I initiated the first phase. I anonymously sent carefully selected evidence to 3 key people in their social and professional sphere. Catherine Morrison, the wife of Richard Morrison, who owned Lux Home Properties and was known for her zero-tolerance policy on office affairs. Jennifer Lawson, Stephanie's closest friend who was godmother to James's children with his unsuspecting wife Laura. And Henry Blackwell, the chairman of the charity board who was a devout family values advocate and major donor to conservative causes. The evidence packages were identical, delivered via courier service to their homes in plain envelopes marked personal and confidential. Each contained a brief and signed note stating simply, "I believe you should be aware of this situation given your position and values." Attached were a dozen carefully chosen photographs showing Stephanie and James entering hotels together, time-stamped to show when they were supposedly working. Also included were redacted snippets of emails discussing their relationship, with just enough context to be unmistakable, but without revealing how the information was obtained. The timing was deliberate, close enough to the gala that they wouldn't have time to formulate a coordinated response, but not so last minute that they might miss the event altogether. I wanted them there, surrounded by their peers. When the whispers began that on the evening of the gala, I dressed with particular care. A new charcoal Tom Ford suit that accentuated my improved physique, a crisp white shirt, and a deep blue tie that Stephanie had once said brought out my eyes. The man in the mirror looked confident, composed, even formidable, a far cry from the devastated husband who had discovered his wife's betrayal 6 months earlier. "You look exceptionally handsome tonight," Stephanie commented as we prepared to leave, a note of surprise in her voice. Perhaps she'd grown so accustomed to seeing me as the comfortable, slightly soft husband she was planning to discard that my transformation had escaped her notice. "Thank you," I replied with a genuine smile. "It feels like an important night." She had no idea how right I was that we arrived at the yacht club promptly at 7 p.m. The venue was stunning, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sound, elegant table settings with fresh spring flower arrangements, a string quartet playing softly. In the corner, nearly 200 of Connecticut's most affluent real estate professionals and their spouses mingled over cocktails, the women in designer gowns, the men in tuxedos and fine suits that I played my role perfectly, the supportive husband at a work function. I circulated the room with Stephanie initially, then separated naturally as she was pulled into conversations with her committee members. I chatted amiably with various guests, complimented the event planning, made appropriate small talk about the real estate market and the worthy cause we were supporting. I watched discreetly as James arrived, solo of course, his wife Laura conspicuously absent as she had been from all such events for months. He was objectively handsome in that polished, catalog model way, tall, with expertly cut dark hair just starting to silver at the temples, an easy smile that revealed perfect teeth. I could see why women found him attractive, though all I saw was the calculated predator beneath the charm. James nodded in my direction with practiced casualness when our eyes met across the room. We had met at previous work functions, always with that thin veneer of professional cordiality. I returned the nod with an amicable smile that revealed nothing of what I knew. Approximately 45 minutes into the event, I noticed the first ripple of discomfort. Catherine Morrison, elegant in emerald green, was showing something on her phone to her husband Richard, whose face darkened visibly as he looked from the screen to where Stephanie and James stood chatting with clients, carefully maintaining professional distance between them. Jennifer Lawson, who had arrived late, stood frozen just inside the entrance, her eyes fixed on Stephanie with an expression of shock and betrayal. She had been Stephanie's confidant for years, the person who had hosted her bridal shower, who had been told countless lies about late nights at the office when Stephanie was actually with James. Henry Blackwell, distinguished and silver-haired, was engaged in an intense conversation with two board members, his usual jovial expression replaced with grim concern. The whispers started about an hour in, hushed conversations behind cocktail napkins, significant glances exchanged between colleagues, the subtle but unmistakable shift in the room's atmosphere. I watched as the broker's wife pulled Richard aside and showed him her phone again, gesturing emphatically. I saw Stephanie's friend staring at her from across the room with unmistakable shock and disgust. The chairman canceled James's planned speech about market trends with a vague excuse about time constraints. Stephanie and James, still working the room separately, were slow to notice the change. They were too practiced in their deception, too confident in their secret, to immediately sense that the ground was shifting beneath them. It wasn't until Richard Morrison abruptly excused himself from a conversation with James, leaving him mid-sentence, that confusion flickered across James's perfect features. Stephanie caught my eye from across the room and raised an eyebrow in question, our long-established signal asking if I knew what was happening. I gave a small shrug and shake of my head. The picture of innocent confusion by the time dinner was announced, the atmosphere had transformed. People who had previously clustered around Stephanie and James, eager to be in the orbit of the firm's star agents, now found reasons to sit at different tables. The seating chart that had placed them at the same table with the Morrisons was hastily adjusted, with place cards shuffled to separate them. I positioned myself at the bar during this commotion, watching as Stephanie approached Jennifer Lawson, only to have her closest friend turn her back and walk away without a word. The hurt and bewilderment on Stephanie's face might have moved me 6 months ago. Now I observed it with clinical detachment. Throughout dinner, the whispers continued. I caught fragments of conversations from nearby tables, both still wearing their wedding rings. Her poor husband is right there. Children with his wife Laura. Can you imagine? Wonder how long Richard will keep them on. By the time dessert was served, both Stephanie and James were visibly uncomfortable, exchanging worried glances across the room, checking their phones repeatedly as if searching for the source of the sudden social frost. That I approached Stephanie. As the formal program began, sliding into the empty chair beside her that others had conspicuously avoided. Everything okay? I asked with seemingly genuine concern. You look upset. Something strange is happening, she murmured, her eyes scanning the room. People are acting weird. Richard barely spoke to me during the fundraising announcement, and Jennifer is completely ignoring me. Maybe it's just event stress, I suggested helpfully. Everyone seems a little tense tonight. Maybe, she replied, clearly unconvinced. Throughout the chairman's speech, I watched as Stephanie's phone buzzed repeatedly with text notifications. Her face paled as she read them, her composure finally cracking. Whatever information was spreading through their social circle, it had reached critical mass by the end of the night. The affair was an open secret. Stephanie and James were confused and panicking, not understanding how they'd been exposed, trying desperately to do damage control. I watched as James cornered Richard Morrison near the coat check, gesturing emphatically, only to be cut off with what appeared to be a terse dismissal. Stephanie made repeated attempts to approach Jennifer, each rebuffed more firmly than the Last up, we drove home in painful silence. Stephanie stared out the passenger window, tension radiating from her body. Several times she started to speak, then stopped herself. I maintained my concerned husband performance, asking once if she wanted to talk about whatever was bothering her, accepting her tight, not now, without pressing further. The fallout was immediate and comprehensive, exactly as I had anticipated. The following morning, while Stephanie was in the shower, her phone buzzed repeatedly on her nightstand. Glancing over casually, I saw Richard Morrison's name on the screen, followed by a text preview that read, "Need to meet immediately regarding your position with." When she emerged from the bathroom, her phone already in her hand, her face was ashen. "I need to go to the office," she said tersely. "Emergency meeting with Richard." On Sunday, I asked, the picture of innocence. "Everything okay?" "I don't know," she replied. And for the first time in months, she wasn't lying to me. "I really don't know." She returned 4 hours later, shell-shocked and defeated. Without explanation, she went straight to our home office and closed the door. I heard muffled phone conversations throughout the afternoon, but respected her privacy, continuing the charade of the oblivious husband for just a little longer. Over the next 2 weeks, the professional and social devastation became clear. Through carefully cultivated contacts in their industry, I learned that both Stephanie and James had been called into separate meetings with Richard Morrison, where they'd been confronted with the evidence of their affair. Both had initially tried to deny it, then attempted to minimize it as a recent, minor indiscretion. The existence of dated photos going back months had made those denials impossible to maintain. While Connecticut is a no-fault divorce state, Lux Home Properties had a strict policy against interoffice relationships, especially undisclosed ones between married employees. The conflict of interest, the potential liability, and the damage to the firm's reputation among its conservative, wealthy client base made their positions untenable. Their colleagues distanced themselves immediately, unwilling to be associated. With the scandal, clients requested different agents, uncomfortable with the questions of integrity the affair raised. James's wife Laura received similar anonymous evidence and filed for divorce within days, taking their children to stay with her parents in Massachusetts. The social circle collapse was equally swift. Jennifer, feeling betrayed by months of lies and manipulation, shared what she knew with their wider friend group. Stephanie had apparently used her as an unwitting alibi multiple times, claiming to be with Jennifer when she was actually with James. The sense of being used, of having been made complicit in the deception, turned her from loyal friend to active opponent. Most devastating of all for them was the discovery that their secret had been exposed by an anonymous source with extensive evidence. The uncertainty of who knew what, of how much had been documented, and who else might receive similar packages of evidence, created a paralyzing fear. Both Stephanie and James became visibly paranoid, checking over their shoulders at restaurants, speaking in hushed tones when in public, clearly terrified that whoever had exposed them was still watching. Within 2 weeks, both Stephanie and James were asked to leave the firm. The official reason was client complaints, but everyone knew the truth. Their professional reputations were in tatters. Their social circle had collapsed. James's marriage was over, and Stephanie and I continued our excruciating dance of pretense. Though her performance had changed dramatically, gone were the late nights and weekend disappearances. She was home constantly now, subdued and distracted, often staring out windows, or at her phone as if waiting for the next blow to fall. She made small, awkward attempts at reconnection, suggesting we watch a movie together, offering to cook my favorite meals, gestures that might have moved me once, but now struck me as panic-driven rather than genuine. That I maintained my concerned, but slightly distant demeanor, asking occasionally about her job search, offering appropriately sympathetic responses to her vague explanations about agency restructuring and taking time to reassess her career path. I never asked directly about the rumors of an affair, playing the role of the husband too trusting or perhaps too oblivious to suspect his wife of infidelity. In reality, I was waiting for the perfect moment to deliver the final blow, the moment when they were at their most vulnerable, their carefully constructed exit plan in ruins, their futures uncertain. Only then would I reveal that I had known everything all along. That moment came exactly 3 weeks after the gala. Only after their social and professional lives had imploded completely did I make my legal move. The timing was critical. They needed to be destabilized enough to be defensive rather than offensive, shaken enough that their planned narrative would crumble under scrutiny. Eleanor had prepared everything meticulously. We had documents ready to file, evidence organized chronologically, financial records annotated to highlight discrepancies. The private investigator's comprehensive report included sworn statements from hotel staff who recognized them as regular guests. The forensic accountant had traced every diverted dollar to its source and destination. Point one evening in late April, when Stephanie was home despondently scrolling through job listings on her laptop, I calmly placed a manila folder in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, looking up with confusion. "My filing for divorce," I replied, my voice even and controlled. "And before you say anything, you might want to look at the second folder." Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the additional folder I placed beside the first. Inside were printouts of her own exit strategy document, photos of her and James entering and leaving hotels, bank statements highlighting her unexplained withdrawals, and a detailed timeline of their affair cross-referenced with her lies about where she had been on those dates and times. The color drained from her face as she flipped through the pages. Her carefully constructed plan had not only failed, it had backfired catastrophically. In that moment, she realized that the social destruction of the past few weeks had been orchestrated, that I had known everything for months, and that I had all the evidence I needed to destroy any narrative she might try to create. "How long have you known?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Since October," I said, watching her mentally recalculate every interaction we'd had over the past 6 months. "I found your exit strategy document when you left your laptop. Open. Very comprehensive planning, by the way." I was almost impressed by the thoroughness. She flinched at my calm recitation of facts, at the absence of the anger or pain she might have expected or perhaps hoped for. Anger she could have used, twisted to support her narrative of an unstable, controlling husband. This cool, methodical response left her nowhere to maneuver. She started, then stopped, recalibrating. "You went through my private emails?" A desperate attempt to shift blame, to find moral high ground in my methods rather than address her betrayal. I had anticipated this exact response. "After I accidentally saw an email preview from James on your open laptop, yes, I looked further," I acknowledged without defensiveness, "and discovered that my wife of 12 years was not only having an affair, but actively planning to destroy me financially and reputationally. I'd say that justified further investigation." She stared at the evidence spread before her, then back at me, struggling to reconcile the husband she thought she knew, the one she had dismissed as too trusting, too absorbed in his work to notice her deception, with the man standing before her who had outmaneuvered her at every turn. "Why did you wait?" she finally asked. "Why not confront me months ago?" "Because you weren't just having an affair, Stephanie," I replied, taking a seat across from her at the dining table. "You were plotting to take everything from me, my home, my savings, my reputation. You were documenting fictional abuse that never happened. You were planning to paint me as unstable and controlling when I've been nothing but supportive of your career, your ambitions, your needs. That required a more strategic response than just confrontation." Her eyes widened slightly at my use of the word strategic, perhaps recognizing it from her own planning document. The realization that I had been playing chess while she thought I was playing checkers seemed to finally land. "So the gala," she began, "was the beginning of the counter-strategy," I confirmed. "I couldn't let you control the narrative when we divorced. Not with what you were planning." "Did you send those photos to Catherine and Jennifer?" she asked, anger finally breaking through her shock. "To Henry Blackwell? Do you have any idea what you've done to my career?" "I simply ensured the truth was known," I replied calmly. "Everything that's happened since is the natural consequence of choices you and James made. And to be clear, I have considerably more evidence than what I've shown you so far. Every hotel visit, every diverted dollar, every lie documented and time-stamped." "What do you want?" she asked after a long silence, defeat evident in her voice. "Why are you showing me this instead of just filing?" "Because despite everything, I wanted to give you one chance to do this the right way," I said. "We can do this the hard way, with everything becoming public record in court, your exit strategy entered as evidence. every sordid detail of your affair documented in legal filings that anyone can access. Or you can agree to my terms, and we can handle this as privately as possible. Your terms, she repeated flatly. My terms are simple. A clean split based on the actual facts, not your fictional narrative. No alimony. You're young, educated, and fully capable of supporting yourself. The house will be sold and proceeds split according to our actual contributions, which, as we both know, means I get 70% since I made the down payment and the majority of the mortgage payments. Retirement. Accounts remain with their original owner. No drawn-out court battle that would only enrich our attorneys. She started to argue, her instinct to negotiate kicking in despite her compromised position. The courts typically split assets 50-50 regardless of contribution. And I've been out of the full-time workforce supporting your career. I cut her off with a short, incredulous laugh. Stephanie, you haven't been supporting my career. You've been building your own career while simultaneously planning an affair and a fraudulent divorce. And we both know you've been working full-time plus for years. As for the 50-50 split, that's for couples without evidence of financial deception and diversion of marital assets. I pulled out another document, the forensic accountant's report. You've diverted $42,647 from our joint accounts over the past year. Money spent on hotels, gifts for James, weekend trips, that separate account you opened without my knowledge. A judge will take that into consideration, I assure you. She fell silent, the full hopelessness of her position finally sinking in. Her carefully constructed plan had not only failed, the very tactics she had intended to use against me had become evidence against her. How would this work? She finally asked, her voice small. My attorney has already drawn up a settlement agreement reflecting these terms, I explained, pulling another document from my briefcase. Review it with your own attorney if you wish, but understand that this offer is considerably more generous than what you'd likely receive if we go to court with all this evidence. You have 48 hours to decide before I file the full complaint with exhibits. And if I sign this, then we proceed with an uncontested divorce. The agreement includes a non-disclosure clause. Neither of us discusses the details publicly. You keep what's legitimately yours, I keep what's legitimately mine, and we both move on with our lives. She tried one last angle, the emotional appeal that had worked so many times in our marriage. 12 years, Mike, she said softly, tears filling her eyes. Doesn't that mean anything? One mistake. This wasn't a mistake, I interrupted firmly. A mistake is a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a sustained campaign of deception spanning at least a year, culminating in a detailed plan to destroy me while presenting yourself as the victim. Don't insult us both by pretending otherwise. The tears disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. She stared at me for a long moment, then nodded once, accepting the new reality. I'll review the agreement with my attorney, she said flatly. Where will you be staying? I'm not leaving our home until it's sold, I replied. The guest room will work fine for me. Or for you, if you prefer. Either way, I suggest we minimize contact until this is finalized. She tried to argue, but her position was hopeless. With both her and James unemployed, their reputations in ruins, and my evidence overwhelming, she had no leverage. My attorney had prepared everything meticulously, closing every loophole her exit strategy had planned to exploit. After consulting with her attorney, a process that took less than the 48 hours I had allowed, Stephanie signed the agreement. Her lawyer, upon seeing the evidence we had compiled, apparently advised her that fighting would only result in greater losses and public humiliation. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly quick with the settlement agreement in place. The judge reviewed the evidence of her affair and financial deceptions during the mandatory review of the settlement terms and approved our agreement without modifications. Her planned narrative of me as neglectful or abusive couldn't gain any traction. Too many people had seen us together at the gala and other events, where I was clearly a supportive, engaged husband that in the end, I retained my retirement accounts. Received the agreed-upon 70% of the proceeds from the house sale, reflecting my larger contribution to the purchase and payments, and walked away with no ongoing financial obligations to Stephanie. She didn't even fight for much. The exposure had left her too devastated to mount an aggressive case, and the comparative speed and privacy of our approach benefited us both. The day our divorce was finalized, We met briefly outside the courthouse with our respective attorneys. The woman who had been my wife for 12 years looked like a stranger now, thin from stress, her usual confident posture diminished, her eyes avoiding mine. "I never thought you had this in you," she said quietly, as our attorneys gave us a moment of privacy. This calculating side. "I learned from the best," I replied simply. "Good luck, Stephanie." I walked away without looking back, feeling neither the vindication nor the closure I had expected. Just a profound weariness and the quiet certainty that I had protected myself from someone who had intended me grave harm disguised as love. That was 3 years ago. The journey since has been one of rebuilding and rediscovery, challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated, but ultimately transformative in the best possible sense. The immediate aftermath of the divorce was admittedly difficult. Despite knowing I had done what was necessary to protect myself, I struggled with the void left by a 12-year relationship. Our home, once sold, became just a house, then a memory. Shared traditions became painful reminders. Mutual friends, even those who fully supported me after learning the truth, carried echoes of my old life that sometimes cut too deep for casual interaction. That I used some of the house sale proceeds to purchase a smaller but more modern home closer to downtown Westport, a fresh start with no associations to my marriage. The loft-style condo with its floor-to-ceiling windows and contemporary design was the antithesis of the traditional colonial we had shared, exactly what I needed to break the psychological patterns of my past. Professionally, I channeled my energy into advancement at Bluestream. The focus and strategic thinking I had developed during my divorce planning translated surprisingly well to corporate strategy. I've been promoted twice in the past 3 years and now lead a development team working on next-generation trading algorithms. The work is challenging and engaging, providing both financial security and intellectual stimulation. That I also finally launched the side business I had been conceptualizing for years, a sophisticated investment analysis tool designed for individual investors. Stephanie had always subtly discouraged this venture, suggesting it was too risky or would require too much time away from us. Without that restraining influence, I secured seed funding, assembled a small development team, and brought the product to market. We're still in growth phase, but the early user feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, and we're projecting profitability by next quarter. Socially, I've rebuilt with intention and authenticity. The divorce forced me to evaluate which relationships were genuine and which were situational. Many mutual friends reached out after learning the truth, expressing shock at Stephanie's actions and offering support. I've welcomed those who didn't participate in the deception back into my life. Though our relationships have necessarily evolved, I've also developed new friendships through my expanded professional network, a hiking group I joined, and surprisingly, through a divorce recovery group that my therapist recommended. Those connections, built on shared experiences and genuine understanding, have proven particularly meaningful. My relationship with therapy has continued as well. Dr. Levine helped me work through not just the betrayal and its aftermath, but deeper patterns in how I approach relationships and trust. I've come to recognize that my tendency to see the best in others, while generally a positive trait, had morphed into a willful blindness where Stephanie was concerned. I'd ignored red flags, rationalized inconsistencies, and prioritized harmony over honesty, patterns I'm committed to not repeating. As for romance, that journey has been gradual and intentional. For the first year after my divorce, I focused entirely on healing and rediscovering myself as an individual rather than as half of a couple. When I did begin dating again, I approached it with new awareness and healthier boundaries. About a year ago, I met Claire at a charity fundraiser for a local literacy program. She's a pediatric occupational therapist, warm, straightforward, and refreshingly direct. Our relationship has developed slowly and thoughtfully, both of us bringing previous marriage experiences and the lessons learned from them. We're not living together yet, but the relationship has a solid foundation of mutual respect and genuine communication that makes me cautiously optimistic about the future. As for Stephanie and James, their story didn't have the ending they had so carefully planned. The professional fallout was severe for both of them. In a field built on reputation and network connections, the scandal of their affair and the manner of its exposure created obstacles that proved difficult to overcome. especially in our relatively small community. Their relationship collapsed under the weight of financial stress and mutual blame within 6 months of the divorce. From what I've heard through industry connections, the recriminations became toxic, each blaming the other for the exposure, for the specific choices that led to their downfall, for the miscalculations in their planning. Last I heard, Stephanie had moved to Arizona to try to rebuild her real estate career where her reputation hadn't preceded her. She reached out once, about a year after the divorce, with an email that alternated between apology and subtle victim positioning. I read it once, then deleted it without response. Some doors are better left closed. James faced even more significant professional consequences. His divorce from Laura was messy and public, with her attorney using many of the same tactics that Stephanie had planned to use against me. The scandal effectively ended his luxury real estate career in the Northeast. He ended up taking a significant step down professionally, working for a much smaller firm in Florida in a junior position. His carefully crafted image of success and sophistication in tatters. Catherine Morrison, the broker's wife who had taken a liking to me during the whole ordeal, occasionally updates me on industry gossip when we run into each other at community events. Apparently, the story of their affair and how it imploded has become something of a cautionary tale in local real estate circles, a whispered warning about professional boundaries and the consequences of deception. I regret how I handled things. It's a question I've examined extensively in therapy. There are moments when I question whether the extent of my revenge was necessary, whether I could have achieved the same protective outcome with less comprehensive destruction of their professional and social standing. But when I remember that document, that cold, calculated exit strategy that would have destroyed me financially and reputationally, I know I did what I needed to do to protect myself. The response was proportional to the threat. I didn't break any laws. I didn't fabricate evidence. I didn't engage in physical intimidation or harassment. I simply made sure the truth came to light in a way that prevented them from controlling the narrative and executing their plan. The consequences they faced were the direct result of their own actions and intentions. Had they simply had an affair without the elaborate exit strategy aimed at destroying me, my response would likely have been different: hurt and anger, certainly, but not the methodical counter-strategy that became necessary for self-preservation. The most important lesson I've learned through all of this is that true strength isn't about avoiding pain or preventing betrayal. It's about how you respond to it. You can let it break you, or you can use it as fuel to rebuild something better. You can become bitter, or you can become wiser. You can define yourself as a victim, or you can reclaim your agency and write a new chapter. Today, I'm happier than I've been in years. My career is thriving, my new business venture is gaining traction, my relationships are more authentic, and my understanding of myself is deeper and more nuanced. I've discovered resilience I didn't know I possessed and built a life that feels genuinely mine, not constructed around someone else's expectations or needs. The betrayal will always be part of my story, but it's no longer the defining chapter. It's merely the catalyst that led to a more authentic life. And that, ultimately, is the best revenge, not the calculated dismantling of their deception, but the deliberate construction of my own happiness in its wake. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe to our channel for more real-life accounts of betrayal and its consequences. Remember, these stories are shared not to promote vengeance, but to illustrate the human capacity for resilience in the face of profound betrayal. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better.